Mr. Gray. How are you, sir?
Doing good, thank you. Nice to see you guys.
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Mark Gray, composer and sound designer, sound artist. What do you like being called, Mark?
Mark, really.
Mark.
No,
Okay, cool.
It's a composer, a sound designer. I mean, it really depends. Quite a bit of my work, I really play two sides of the coin. So, I write a lot of orchestra music. I recently wrote an opera for La Monnaie, so a grand opera in Brussels. So that took place. But then, on the other side of the coin, I've been sound designing for 35 years probably. I hooked up with the composer John Adams about 30 years ago, and we started to collaborate. It's probably a crossover like with LCS and Jonathan Deans and everybody, quite busy in the early 90s. I think Jonathan, he saw his time with John, he was really kind of in many places at one time. So I kind of stepped in and started working with John, and then started working with Kronos Quartet as well, string quartet. So what you call it, I don't know. Busy.
Yeah. The reason we want to invite you is we're collaborating with you right now on a project called Birds in the Moon. And it's a chamber opera that you wrote for contemporary, but it's also adjusted to the demands of what the pandemic is causing with doing live shows. And so I'll let Steve take over from here because he has more information. He's seen it. So take it away, guys, and let's talk about Birds in the Moon.
Thanks, Josh. Yes, this is crazy good and fun. And I was lucky. I did a little road trip a few weeks ago and had this chance to see the production environment for this. So Mark, why don't you just give us just a little bit background on the project, and we can sit on this slide, and when you're ready to share your screen, just take over.
Okay, great. Yeah, Birds in the Moon is it's a mobile chamber opera. It's about 70 minutes in length, and it's kind of a format that a lot of opera companies are kind of going into right now. They still put the war horses on the large stages. However, more agility in the performing arts is really necessary in the 21st century, right? So actually pre-COVID, we started developing this work, Birds in the Moon, as a mobile chamber opera. And it just so happens with the pandemic, it turns out to be an ideal, like essentially a venue that we can put really anywhere. The goal of the piece is actually to be able to take a theatrical work to remote places, to places that might be more disenfranchised, places which don't have the opportunities, maybe to go to the theater or even have a theater. Maybe they just have a movie theater, where we see this driving up into a small town in Texas and in a parking lot of, Home Depot. And, we do a performance and then we close it all up and it goes off to another place.
So this is a great example of what I would call like guerrilla spatial in a sense,
Yeah. Totally.
And that's one thing I love seeing this is like the mobile nature of it. It harkens back to some of my early experience, but also just the fact that you can set up a great system with not a ton of outputs. You can get some good detail.
Yeah, and this is where Spacemap is just totally essential in this, is that there's no mixer. Basically, the person that's operating this entire show is essentially like a production stage manager that will have an iPad that will be firing off Go cues. Those basically in the integrated network that we've made inside of the shipping container itself, it houses a Mac Mini, which is controlling through QLab, it's controlling video. We have a video wall, which I'll show you guys. It's a LED video wall, 2 by 4 meter on the upstage part of the shipping container when the stage is revealed. The lighting control will be controlled by UDP commands from QLab, sending to a DMX server. So we'll be hitting Go cues with those. And then essentially sound, the audio portion of this, is the work is for soprano, an actor, a string quartet, and soundscapes, so electronic soundscapes. And really the plan is to fully automate each of the scenes and then essentially have the ability to recall with a very simple Go cue at specific points in the music score. And so the flexibility, it's been amazing actually working with Spacemap over the past 8 months and exploring what it can do, but also what it can do for our production. And it really outperforms. What I'm starting to get into is taking, say, trajectories, automating the trajectory movement over the course of time, and then capturing the entire scene at that state and saving it, moving on. Like you said, you just move right on, just get to the next thing. And then really, once you start recalling, it's quite simple on that side of it. So internally we're dealing with, the system equalization in the Galaxy. Yeah, so no console. It's literally wireless microphones preamped into a Galaxy. And then I have 24 inputs of AVB currently to build the soundscapes going through Ableton Live. And then with Live, I'm running Oscar, which is the earcam plugin for DAWs. So that allows me to capture the kind of Spacemap panner movement. And then I can essentially just drop that in time and then set cue points. So when the cueing happens from stage management, it just forges ahead pretty seamlessly. Let me show you a couple images of this. So basically, shipping container, what we have here is essentially we have these wings that are on the side, and these close in to where that string quartet is to basically pack it up and to drive off. The stage that the guy is standing on, our actor, is actually the side of the shipping container. So that side drops down, and then the wings are exposed. On those wings are lighting instruments, loudspeakers, and all of these like little blue dots are essentially the bottoms of aluminum cans. So it's supposed to like reflect like a bird's wing. Shipping container is in full use. So we have action on top, we have action on the stage, we have action upstage. We have a little 2 meter by 4 meter LED wall in the back. So it can be performed in daytime as well. Of course, lighting gets hit kind of bad in full sunlight. However, the LED screen is high resolution, and it's like the screens you see on the side of a freeway. They're just super bright. So another perspective, this time it's off the truck. But again, all of a sudden we're using the top of the shipping container as a performance area. Down below, again, there's now kind of a thrust on the apron. If I start moving forward a little bit, this is some drawings of the container in its raw. So what we have we have 8 UP4 slims, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then there's 2 more in the back that are like effect speakers. They're pointing up stage and cross-firing. So essentially we have 8 kind of like making this bowl like effect. Up here, we have 2 X40s, one there. And then in the back, we have 2 900 elements, one on each side. And basically, if I start to move forward, you see like more perspective of what happens. The speakers themselves, the UP4 Slims are, of course, on the wing that swings. Also, the X40 itself is hinged on the post of this. So when it collapses, the entire PA closes with it. So it like folds on top of itself, and then the yellow stage lifts up and closes the container itself. Here's a more bird's eye view of what's happening. One of the reasons of trying to really extend out some speaker elements as far as I could. Again, audiences for this are probably during COVID now, there'll probably be 60 to 80 people. Pre-COVID or post-COVID, we were looking at about 250 seats to 300 seats. And so what we're looking at is when, say, our soprano, our kind of bird woman, is downstage here, I have speakers that are even farther downstage than she is. So as they move up stage, I can pretty much move the sound image with Spacemap with them, filling in more speakers as they get closer to a speaker element, say. Yeah, or if they're up on top of the container itself, then these X40s become like front fills, really. And so this is a render of the way the wings close on top of themselves. And then the yellow stage essentially hoists up and becomes the side of the shipping container, and off it goes to the next venue.
That's awesome. So how are you using Spacemap? Are you doing any panning? And I know you talked about it a little bit, but can you expand upon it? What did you end up doing?
A great deal of the sound designs I work on are very large format works. And I've been the resident sound designer at the Park Avenue Armory in Manhattan for like the past 3.5 years, I guess. And so that's the size of one city block of Manhattan, that venue. And we get all kinds of different types of performances passing through companies, opera, traditional theater, one-man shows, dance. The list goes on and on and on. It's always spatialized in there somehow because the space is so large. So what's interesting about this work, and I think where I really wanted to go initially with Birds in the Moon, was to just like get back to, kind of rough and tumble theater and get back to really the building blocks and to make a piece of work that is sustainable, right? And it's a piece of work that really you can just, close up shop, drive off, open it up somewhere else. So how Spacemap integrates into this, I've been using it for multiple kind of job duties, right? So one of them is to use derived nodes to create essentially an auxiliary send. So I can move a panner around, and with that derived node, I can send levels that are respective to the speaker groupings down that funnel, and then send it to, say, subs at specific times for effects, or to go outside and hit reverberation. And so I've been playing around with an old PCM 91. So I use a derived node to fire down audio signal right into that PCM 91, and then ultimately controlling the reverb
right.
in Spacemap is fairly unique too.
So Mark, so in your layout, I know it's a single Galaxy 816. How many loudspeaker channels are there?
We have 12 total.
Right. So basically, for those at home, you can then take one of those outputs to kind of reinforce what Mark's saying. Take one of the outputs of the Galaxy as a feed into the reverb unit, and then take the returns into, say, inputs 7 and 8. So in his case, he has the 6 microphones that are coming in analog after a mic pre into the Galaxy. He has EQ and delay there. And then 12 of the outputs are going to loudspeakers, and one of the outputs of the Galaxy goes into the reverb, and the returns of that reverb come into input 7 and 8 of the Galaxy. And so then
exactly,
you can, in a similar way that I showed with my home layout here, you can then either through derived or virtual nodes, you can then basically sprinkle this output into parts of the space map so that maybe where you move to one part of the space map, no signal will hit the reverb. Whereas if you push it to the edges, you'll hit the reverb. So that's one way that you can use combination of silent nodes, virtual nodes, and speaker nodes to basically crossfade between a space that is only speakers, so then a combination of speakers and reverb feed, and then out to silence. So you can kind of create your own landscape in Spacemap where maybe as you pan to the center of the map, it gets reverberant. It doesn't have to be, it could be like
precisely. Or if they're going up on the top, their reaction to the electronics is quite different than they are, say, when they're down center.
Just to reiterate what's going on with that. So we've talked about having additive space maps and stuff like that. And here is our arena space map. And we're using the arena space map in multiple ways.
You'll note that this space map is very similar to one I was showing you that I'm using here in an apartment, right? So
Exactly.
kind of speaks to the scalability of Spacemap.
So that's what's amazing about it, is you can go from very small system to very large system, but it's so the kind of interface of the human to get to the mix is super quick on whatever scale that you're adapting this to.
Right. Yeah, and so one of the things that we like to do with virtual nodes, and I like to do a lot, is make quads of different surround setups. So here we have a space map that not only can granularly control our frontal system, and I can move things around. So let's say we had Mark's reverberator in on an input channel, and we had surrounds. I could easily use this virtual node and create quad surrounds. So I could have a left, a right, rear, I could have a front and a back. Or if I want to hit all surrounds, I just tap the virtual node that I'm closest to, and we energize all of the surrounds that we need. And that's the cool part, is scalability, but also flexibility, so that you as the sound artist and you as the designer can really get into building something quickly that is incredible to control. So what I'll do is I'll have a dry channel, and I'll put my dry channel where I need it to be. And like, let's say my artist is right here, and that's the singer. Then I'll pop over to the next channel, and I'll add the same space map. And here it is. And then I'll just have this be the reverb, and I'll just place it here. And then I can use the level to, or if I made silent nodes, I can actually use the level to just control how much of the reverb I want into a system.
Yeah, and this is what I was getting at, was what I've been using reverberation kind of control as well, is say channel 1 coming from Ableton Live is, I'm firing a mono AVB stream. Then I take, say, reverberation of that in Ableton Live, of that same like initial stem kind of recording, and I pipe that into channel 2. Then we have channel 1 dry signal, channel 2 reverberated signal. And then what I've been playing with is the mirroring. So I group the two channels together, and then I do like a mirror X. So wherever, say, channel 1 is, channel 2 is not. And so what happens is like in those UP4 Slims I was showing you in the Birds in the Moon set, it's kind of a fishbowl, or a bowl, actually, pretty wide bowl, is to, as I'm moving sound around the space, kind of from a left to a right, the reverberation is following like exact 180 degrees opposite. So what ends up happening is the psychoacoustic of what you hear or what you experience is actually there's kind of body on the tail of the direct sound that's moving around, that the reverberation is just trailing closely behind. And so it's very interesting. So like, as far as electronic effects and ways in which to automate kind of dry signals in relationship to wet signals, you can get very creative with the placement of that reverberation and really do some very wild things that you would just never have really thought of before, where now you start experimenting with it, and it's you come up with really interesting artifacts and really interesting
one thing
byproducts of an idea.
One thing that we do a lot of, and it always comes up, is what do I do when I just have like a DJ or electronic musician that's just sending me a stereo track? Typically, if it comes into a mix console, what we do is we'll filter out content. So I'll add that input and put it on like 4 auxes, and I'll take aux 1 and I'll add a high pass and just have high frequency content. And then I'll send that to a separate channel. And then I'll have the mids, and then I'll have the lows. And what I like to do also is use my whatever plug-in reverb that I have at hand, and I'll add a wet as well. And then you now have this, dry stereo track that's coming in that you can manipulate with whatever your loudspeaker layout is.
Yeah.
So we did that quite a bit at MoogFest in 2019 when we came back. 2018, we had more of a pre-production period to work with Shabazz Palaces and Mouse on Mars and others. Last year, 2019, we didn't. So we ended up working with a lot of the electronic music artists and DJs with kind of dynamically, exactly what you're saying, at the console doing different filtering and band panning. So you could take the lows, you put a high pass and you keep the lows solid in the front, and then you take the mids and the highs and independently work with those. And that was really great. And it was really fun. And we did that actually at ISC at a trade show earlier this year in Amsterdam. And somebody we hired, DJ, had never seen any of this before. And she just, 5 minutes and she was doing this all herself once we had it set up.
So that's something I want to talk about,
yeah.
Mark. You said you were going to have an operator that's not really that trained, or that's just recalling cues. How easy was it to just hand them an iPad? And did they?
Well, also, hey,
super
Josh,
easy.
Yeah. And but also clarification: this is still in production, so it's not like it's mounted. It's being mixed and produced and tweaked.
We're still building it. Yeah.
They're still building it. So it's
One of the things about the iPad that I like is, especially when and you're in a very collaborative theatrical environment, when I'm in those types of places, unlike looking at previous generations of a giant cue station window, it's really cool that I can now pick this thing up and go to my lighting designer and say, hey, when you move this sound here, I'll move it here. And, or the director when I'm collaborating. So
totally.
Have you found that?
I have, and in the build so far, we've had quite a few of those experiences. But in really quite a few of the operas I sound design, like I've done quite a few at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City, and there is so little stage time there, just unbelievable amount. Like you're kind of shocked at how quickly things are moving, and really, the iPad has been my savior in those situations. I've actually mixed and equalized essentially system settings, and then going through and sweeping through input channel, like RF equalization as well as compression, during like the final dress rehearsal, with a full audience. And it's like, it's the only way to be able to do it is where you have an operator at the console that's really hitting the mark on input channels. And then, for myself to be able to migrate around, walk down and work with that stage director or work with that lighting designer to, integrate more, but also to find the coverage issues in the hall itself. Like myself to be able to just walk down to the front row right behind the maestro and then slowly graduate back every 3 rows to see how the center cluster is covering, while 28 open wireless microphones are being mixed. So it's really critical actually to have something super mobile, super clear. And I've really only been beta testing for about 8 months now. So I'm looking forward to when we get back into the swing of real performances out, in a real theater, to start integrating this. It's interesting because it must have been December of 19, I was working on a show at the Park Avenue Armory, which was a huge, massive dance show. And the set was pretty much the entire open space. But all of the dancers had black tracks, as well as we had a full surround system around the audience, as well as a center system emanating out, like a big, massive, almost like a massive center cluster. But the ability to be able to control that, I was noodling around with all kinds of things, trying to figure out patches to make it work. And I mean, it's amazing when Steve contacted me and we started talking about this, the minute I was diving into it, it's like all my problems are solved with that. It's like that production, all of those things were dealt with like literally in a single blow. And it's a real game changer.
Yeah, a couple of things I just want to point out just so people understand. You went over it really quickly. I think it's really critical because, I've been an automation geek for, since the 80s. And I started, my early software control was, automating a NECAM, a Neve console with NECAM automation. We retrofit with MIDI with a Paya kit. Like, this was crazy stuff. It's like Rube Goldberg, Max, and all this. But that's how I got into automation. So I started in that kind of software realm. And then through the world of theater, we kind of went into this, it's cues, it's cues, cues, and you're programming, you're doing all this stuff. And now we're back in live and we want to make it quicker. But there are some elements of that kind of dynamic automation, like touch-based automation, like you have in a DAW for a 5.1 panner, that are really useful because the automation tracks content directly. And so what you have, Ableton Live
Mm-hmm.
playing back your tracks, and people are using Ableton Live for live shows all over
they're all over the place now. Yeah.
Right. And so for those who didn't catch that when you mentioned it, Oscar is a plugin created by Earcom that we support. And this provides the ability to record and play back the gestural commands X, Y, and
the envelopes,
and crossfade, all this stuff. You can do this with the iPad, and when you touch the iPad with that Oscar plugin, it'll drop into touch mode, and you can overdub. So basically, the same way you do with the Flying Faders console or trademark, whatever.
It's exactly the same thing.
It's the same thing, but now you're doing it with the iPad. This was a huge improvement from what we did with the prototypes. We tried to do it with the Lemur. It was very hard. Couldn't do it. But now we have that all managed, so the touch messages, when you touch the iPad, goes to the Galaxy. Galaxy then tells Oscar, hey, it's been touched. And then it punches in. So it's doing that. And then in addition, we have the mix snapshots to set up the major points in your show or your production that are just like sets everything up. And those you could recall with QLab. So QLab is like your main like ringmaster for show control, saying, do this one. And then it might also be that he has this swirl of 4 channels looping in a weird way using Spacemap trajectories. Those could be triggered by QLab as well to hit just a few channels. But then let's say there's a sound effect of a bird flying by. And that one, you want to do that with the automation in Ableton, because that way, if you move that bird sound effect somewhere else, the automation that you recorded with it, with Oscar touching, would track with it and would move. So I think it's like, so basically our goal was to try to make Spacemap play as nicely as possible with whether it's QLab or Oscar or other snapshot-based systems, and also live.
And live, it's interesting because with live, you can use it in essentially the traditional, timeline sequencer, but you can also use it in session mode, which is a cyclic, tracking environment, and which is typically what I use. And so, like doing, essentially with set lists and, doing a capture and a recall through Spacemap, I can actually also do the exact same thing in Ableton Live by just taking pre-captured clips from Oscar data and then just move those clips around, in a graphic interface.
Basically, like you could go into write mode in Oscar in your DAW and play a trajectory that you designed in Spacemap, and that data can get captured in, and then you can manipulate it.
Yeah, and then you can literally drop it, on a bar of music. Say if there's, pre-recorded playback moving, you can drop something literally right on the mark. So internally with, say, stage management cues, with them very simply hitting go on, say, QLab remote, internally there's a lot of automation happening. And I think that's what's really unique about this, is it's such a simple setup. It's the Galaxy, it's a Mac Mini, I have a Motu AVB switch, Ubiquiti router, just so everything is wireless, running Ableton, and it kind of does its thing, right? And it's very, very self-contained.
I can't wait to see what you do with it on a very, very large scale show. That'll be exciting. Cool part about the shipping container also is you could ship it internationally. So that's it's a shipping container.
We've been talking about that, and I mean, right now it looks definitely it premieres in LA in April, and then it goes to New York City in May.
Up about that.
Yeah,
here we go.
So it's starting to gather a little steam, which is good. So.
Here's the piece. The piece is called Birds in the Moon. It's still in development, but it will premiere at the Broad Stage in Santa Monica. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
If you go to thebroadstage.org, they will be posting dates. Of course, with the pandemic, dates are in flux, but they will be posting dates as soon as they solidify them. But it should be really cool. And then you said you're going to New York as well, Mark.
We are. It looks as if New York will happen, and that's probably May. Cool. And one of the things that's really very interesting about this shipping container come super high quality audio system, high res LED display lighting system is in and around the performances of Birds in the Moon. Our plan is to also curate some mini festivals. And so to have various content passing through the shipping container, and ultimately, like a troubadour set, kind of gather some works as we're banding this thing around the country. And so there's some ideas that it might actually, the container itself might be in New York for maybe a month. We might have several mini festivals happening that are in connection with the container, and so we're working a lot of those things out. However, it gives us the flexibility where, Birds of the Moon is really like a flagship idea, right? But then what else can we do with it? I can, only imagine what we're going to have coming along kind of with the ride of this. So
it's really cool that you're going to be involving other pieces and using just the infrastructure to make more art. I think that's a great thing, especially now.
Yeah. And showcase the technology, audio as well as video technology, because I foresee people using something like Touch Designer or Isadora, hitting that LED wall, and then maybe there's like a Max MSP artist that's doing something downstage with the audio system. And it's not surround because there are no speakers behind the audience, but I interpret this system more like a panoramic stereo. It's a very wide stereo, but it has depth in it. But what's interesting is when I put content just through the X40s, just to like listen to something as reference, right? But then the minute I put it out into Spacemap in kind of the trajectory around the space, all of a sudden it just opens up, and it's like 50 feet wider than it really feels like it should be. And I think Steve, we experienced that when we were when you came to Richmond and saw the container itself, and it's pretty amazing. I was very surprised. A lot of it's just, again, on paper you do one thing, but then how does it translate to the real world? And Spacemap has really definitely outdone itself, you guys.
We want to hear more from you when you start using it more. Coming next new year, we'll probably do 1 or 2 more roundtables, and we'll talk about immersive sound system designs. Bob McCarthy has been hard at work, and we're also going to have a session on what to do if you don't have your dream budget or system. So we'll start the value engineering out, and we'll talk about where to make those compromises in your immersive system, but still have a great show and an immersive experience.
I'll just say my rig here, I'm using a Galaxy 408. So
yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Spacemap is an abstraction of a loudspeaker layout. You can use it with anything. Spacemap's also content agnostic. So what you send us, you can move around. And so that gives you the ultimate flexibility. But of course, in any room, there are physics that you have to adhere to. And so that's what those next Spacemaps will be about. We talked a lot about OSC and a DAW today. So in the chat, I linked to the help website where we discuss how to use Oscar, the plugin in a DAW for bi-directional control of Spacemap Go. It's going to be really cool to see what people do with it. And I haven't used...
That's really like a great thing.
Mark, thank you so much for joining. We look forward to seeing what you do next. And what's your website, Mark?
Mark Gray, Grey, composer.com.
There it is. You can find out Mark's work at markgraycomposer.com. Well, thank you so much. And if you guys do have questions, feel free to send them in via meyersound.com/contact. We'll see you guys next year.